Hello, everyone. It's so great to have you here with us today. We're excited to share some fun stories and tips from our kitchens. I hope you enjoy the conversation. So I had quite the adventure in the kitchen recently. I was all set to make my famous pumpkin spice cookies for a neighborhood bake sale. These cookies are always a hit, especially in the fall when everyone's craving that warm, cozy flavor of pumpkin spice. But as I was gathering my ingredients, I realized I was completely out of pumpkin spice. Can you believe it? Pumpkin spice is such a quintessential blend. Cinnamon, nutmeg, ginger, and cloves all mixed together to create that perfect autumn flavor. I usually use it in everything from pies to lattes, and it's super popular here in Washington, especially during the fall season when the leaves are turning and there's a chill in the air. Faced with this dilemma, I had to get a little creative. Instead of just substituting with similar spices, I decided to make my own pumpkin spice mix from scratch. I started with the basics: cinnamon, nutmeg, ginger, and cloves, but I wanted to add a little something extra to make the flavor really pop. So I experimented with adding a pinch of cardamom and a touch of allspice, which gave the cookies a unique, slightly exotic twist. It turned out to be a huge success. The cookies were even more flavorful than usual, and everyone at the bake sale was asking for the recipe.
Emily, that sounds absolutely delicious. I love how you turn a potential disaster into something amazing. Those cookies must have been incredible with that extra spice twist. I'm curious, though, did you find that making your own blend affected the texture or balance of flavors in the cookies at all?
Thanks, Chloe. The texture was just as soft and chewy as always, but the flavor was a bit more complex. The cardamom added a subtle warmth, and the allspice gave it a little extra depth. It was a fun experiment, and it made me realize how versatile pumpkin spice can be.
I'm so impressed, Emily. I've always been a big fan of pumpkin spice, especially in desserts. I've got to ask, did you notice any difference in the aroma of the cookies when they were baking? That's one of my favorite parts of using pumpkin spice.
Oh, Maya, the aroma was heavenly. The whole house smelled like fall. The cardamom added a slightly citrusy note that was really refreshing, and the allspice gave it a warm, spicy undertone. It made the baking process even more enjoyable.
Emily, your resourcefulness is truly inspiring. I'm wondering, did you end up sharing your homemade pumpkin spice blend with anyone else at the bake sale? It sounds like something others would love to try.
Actually, yes. A few of my neighbors were intrigued when they heard about my little experiment, so I ended up sharing the blend with them. They were all excited to try it out in their own baking.
Emily, that's such a great idea. I've never thought of making my own spice blends, but you've inspired me to give it a try. How long do you think your homemade pumpkin spice will keep?
Great question, Sarah. I'd say it should last about 6 months if stored in an airtight container, just like store-bought spices. The key is to keep it in a cool, dark place to preserve the flavors.
I really appreciate what you said about freshness, Emily. That's actually my main criterion. When buying pumpkin spice, I always make sure to buy it as close to the season as possible, so the spices are at their peak flavor. In Florida, we use pumpkin spice a lot for things like pumpkin flan or even spiced sweet potato dishes, so it's important that the spices are fresh and vibrant. Freshness really makes the difference in the intensity of the flavor, and I always check the expiration date before purchasing.
I totally agree with you, Maya. Freshness is key for me. The next big factor is the blend ratio. I am really particular about the balance of spices in the mix. Some store-bought blends can be heavy on cinnamon, but I prefer a more balanced ratio where the other spices aren't overshadowed. In New York, I use pumpkin spice in everything from cheesecakes to savory dishes like pumpkin risotto, so the balance has to be just right. I always check the label for the blend ratio, or if I can, I'll sample it first to make sure it's up to my standards.
Both of you bring up excellent points. I'd add that organic sourcing is another critical factor for me. Living in Texas, where we value wholesome, organic ingredients, I look for pumpkin spice that's made from organically grown spices. Organic spices tend to have a purer, more robust flavor because they're grown without synthetic pesticides or fertilizers. I find that they work especially well in my pumpkin bread or spiced pecan pies, which are big hits in my community.
I agree with you all, and I'd like to emphasize the importance of the origin of the spices. Where the spices are sourced can make a huge difference in the flavor profile. For instance, cinnamon from Ceylon has a milder, sweeter flavor compared to the more intense, robust cassia cinnamon. In California, I love using pumpkin spice in lattes and muffins, so I look for blends that specify the origin of the spices. This way, I can choose a blend that matches the flavor I'm going for.
All great points. The last thing I'd mention is packaging. I prefer to buy pumpkin spice in small quantities in airtight containers to preserve the freshness and potency. In Washington, we tend to bake a lot during the fall and winter, so having sealed packaging helps keep the spices fresh for all our seasonal treats like pumpkin bread and spice cider. I always make sure the packaging is sturdy and well-sealed to avoid losing any of that wonderful aroma.
When it comes to alternatives, I found that in New York, maple syrup can be a great substitute for pumpkin spice in certain recipes, especially if you're looking to add a different layer of flavor. It's not a perfect match, but it brings its own warm, earthy sweetness that complements fall desserts beautifully. I've used it in cheesecakes and even in a maple pumpkin pie, and while it doesn't have the spiciness of pumpkin spice, it adds a rich, comforting flavor that's really special.
I love that idea, Chloe. Here in California, I often reach for chai spice when I'm out of pumpkin spice. Chai has a similar warmth and spice profile, with the added complexity of cardamom and black pepper. I've used it in lattes and even in pumpkin bread, and it gives the dish a slightly different but equally delicious flavor. It's a bit more intense, so I usually use a little less than I would with pumpkin spice.
In Florida, we sometimes use a blend of cinnamon and allspice as an alternative. Allspice has that warm clove-like flavor that pairs really well with cinnamon, and it's readily available here. I've used this combination in my spice flan, and while it's not quite the same as pumpkin spice, it still gives that warm, cozy flavor that people love.
I like those suggestions. In Texas, I found that a combination of cinnamon, nutmeg, and a touch of cayenne pepper can be a surprisingly good substitute. The cayenne adds a little kick that's unexpected but really enjoyable, especially in spiced pecan pies or sweet potato dishes. It's a bit more adventurous, but it's a fun way to mix things up if you're looking for something different.
Thank you all for your wonderful insights. Today, we've covered everything from my little pumpkin spice crisis to how we can choose the best pumpkin spice, and even what alternatives we can use when we're in a pinch. Chloe, Maya, Jennifer, and Sarah, you all brought such great perspectives and ideas to the table. I'm sure our viewers have learned so much from this discussion. And with that, we'll wrap things up. Thank you so much for joining us today. We hope you've enjoyed our chat and picked up some useful tips for your own kitchen adventures. Until next time, happy cooking!